Jeff Cavalier, aka Athlean-X, has launched a full-on attack on lengthened partials in defense of face pulls. Now, as Dr. Lengthened Partials himself right here, I'm going to react to this. Is Jeff Cavalier wrong about lengthened partials?
Okay, I got a quiz for you here today. It involves this first clip. Jesse, go ahead and show them. Okay, I want you to compare this exercise and what you're seeing done here. We know it's a lat pull down, but what specifically is being done here? Okay, if you've watched any kind of YouTube fitness, likely it's jumping out to you. You know exactly what I'm talking about, but if not, watch the exercise and evaluate. Now, if that wasn't helpful enough, I will give you a hint. Go ahead and show this one now. Okay, do you recognize what's happening now when he's doing it? Okay, again, it's not necessarily the lat pull down, but it's actually maybe how it's being performed. Okay, great. Now, the next part of this test is I want you to compare that and the muscle building benefits specifically of what you just saw to this next exercise. Jesse, go ahead and cue that up.
You got it.
Now, watch this exercise. And again, compare it, muscle building benefits to what you just saw. Now, if you don't recognize what this is, then it means that you're not only not watching enough YouTube fitness, but you're certainly not watching enough Athlean-X. And it kind of breaks my heart,
actually.
actually.
It's going to be okay, Jeff. Don't worry
I'm just
about
saying it does. So this is a face pull. I'll give that part away. And it's not just my favorite exercise. It's not going to win just because I like it. Again, we're going to pair these things objectively head to head. Actually, you can see Jesse's used the exercise too to build up quite a nice upper back. Which one do you think builds more muscle? All right, now, the reason for this question and why we're pitting them head to head is actually something I never thought I'd have to do, except we get comments and questions, and we got one from who?
For what it's worth, the face pull and the lat pull down are not interchangeable. They are not even the same movement pattern. Bit of weird comparison. I know Athlean-X has a certain fetish for face pulls, which is fine. We all have our quirks. But face pulls won't magically prevent injury, I'm sorry to tell you. If performed the right way, they can be a decent rear delt exercise, and even upper back. But they fall more so in the rowing category of things than they do in the pull down, so it's a bit of an odd comparison to draw. But without further ado, I see what he's doing here with lengthened partials. I saw him in the first 30 seconds. He was showing lengthened partials. I've got my eye on you, pal. Let's see what happens.
Okay, what did he say?
He said, Jeff, I've been seeing so many videos about long length partials and how much more effective they are even when compared to full range of motion reps. Which brings me to your beloved face pulls. I know they are safe and everything, but they don't meet the criteria for an effective long length partial exercise. Therefore, should I find a new exercise that I can apply long length partials to?
Okay, so there's a lot to go through here. Okay, first of all, long length partials was the answer to the first thing that you saw there.
So hey, first of all, thank you for watching my videos presumably on long length partials, dear commenter. I think the face pull isn't the best suited to lengthened partials because you're not getting a full stretch on the rear delt anyways. If you just put your arm in front of you, like this, like it would be during a face pull at the very bottom of the rep, you're unlikely to feel much of a rear delt stretch. Instead, if you do something like a rear delt cable crossover, which yes, I coined myself, I think, all of a sudden you're getting a much deeper stretch in your rear delts. And that exercise, for example, does lend itself pretty well to lengthened partials. But with all that being said, despite the face pull not providing a great stretch on the rear delts, you can still do lengthened partials on any exercise. The face pull just doesn't involve that very deep stretched position, and so it's probably not the best exercise for hypertrophy. But let's see what Jeff Cavalier has to say.
A long length partial being the partial repetition, not full range of motion, that's being done with usually heavy weights, good load, at that top extended portion of the range of motion, or the most stretched portion of the muscle during that exercise. But I'll answer the question there. Does the face pull, first and foremost, meet the criteria for a good long length partial exercise? It doesn't really. So he's not incorrect in that. When you have the beginning portion of a face pull, some might say, well, you can be in a long length in that, can't you? Not really, because it requires heavy loads. You need high tension with stretch to make the long length partial effective. Because I could do, let's say, a stretch exercise like a seated dumbbell curl with a pair of 3-pound pink dumbbells in my hands all day long, and I'm not going to get the same effect. You need the weight plus the stretch to create the tension that makes those productive.
That is correct, actually. Well done, Jeff. I don't think that you would get the benefits just by being in the stretch position, right? And in fact, when people say that stretch-mediated hypertrophy is what is happening with lengthened partials, that is likely untrue. With stretching interventions in humans, you generally need to spend at least an hour per week stretching to see appreciable amounts of muscle growth. In contrast, when you're doing lengthened partials, you're spending an extra 5, 10, 20, 30 seconds, maybe a minute per workout in a stretch position. And so if we're only really starting to see hypertrophy when you're doing at least an hour of stretching a week, at the most lengthened position possible during stretching, I don't think we can safely say that that is what's happening with lengthened partials. So absolutely, it is not just muscle length, it is tension. And there are a few studies now showing, for example, comparing the preacher curl to an incline curl, suggesting that the amount of tension in a relatively stretched position is more important than just getting a deep stretch. And so something like a preacher curl might be a little bit better, all else being equal, than an incline curl. But let's keep going.
Right. In order to build muscle, we know that eccentric overload is one of the three main drivers of hypertrophy. So the first thing that grabs my attention is everyone wants to talk about long length partials right now, but we've been talking about them forever, really, and that is they're a subset of eccentric training, a known stimulus for growth. So when research studies come out, again, that claim, or even, let's say, prove in the study, long length partials create more muscle gains than full range of motion.
Eccentric overload has nothing to do with long length partials. In a long length partial, you're doing both an eccentric, a concentric phase, and sometimes even pausing. You're doing the exact three phases that you'd also do during a full range of motion rep. And also, eccentric overload is not one of the three primary drivers of hypertrophy. I could go on a whole tangent here about mechanisms versus stimuli of hypertrophy, get on a whole thing about taxonomy. We'll be releasing a whole article on that topic with Strong by Science soon. But no, eccentric overload is not regarded as one of the three primary drivers of hypertrophy. In fact, when you look at the data on eccentric accentuated loading training, or essentially lifts where you put more weight on the eccentric compared to the lifting phase as a means to make the eccentric harder and more stimulating, we generally don't see more muscle growth from doing that. And so not only is this not the consensus within the evidence, even when you look at training specifically designed to accentuate the eccentric, it doesn't seem to cause more hypertrophy. And finally, to reiterate, lengthened partials are not the same thing as eccentric overload training. Not even close. But let's continue.
Long length partials can produce more muscle gains than the contracted portion of an exercise.
Okay.
Long length partials can increase muscle mass when compared to not using them 5 to 10%. All right, and some even create protocols and recommend protocols that involve only the use of long length partials, and they throw out the rest of the repetition.
That's me right there. Only long length partials for the past year and a half of training or so. Still made some gains. He cited my paper here as well, I think, with a 5 to 10% more growth. It's great to hear. Credit to Athlean-X, aka Jeff Cavalier here. He seems to be relatively clued in with the research on this one.
So if I looked at that lat pull down again, a full range of motion repetition would bring that bar all the way down to my chest and all the way back up. Now the eccentric portion of that repetition is the entire raising of the bar back to the top. When I have heavy loads there, under tension in an elongating muscle, most up here when it's fully stretched, but in an elongating muscle, I have that increased eccentric load. The partial is going to hang out at that top portion where you're most elongated and most stretched, which will drive the most tension theoretically to the muscle. So it should come as no surprise that these are effective and that they actually work for building muscle. I'm not arguing that. I use them in my own training.
Saying that it drives the most tension to the muscle is a very weird thing to touch on, because it really depends on how you view tension. For instance, if all you conceptualize tension as is how much tension is being delivered to the muscle in one instant, then theoretically you would train only with 1 rep maxes, because that's the most amount of weight you can use and when you're producing the most tension. Instead, tension should probably be viewed as an area under the curve of how much tension the muscles are being exposed to at different points throughout a set. And importantly, with range of motion, for example, external and internal moment arms also play into tension. For example, if you do lengthened partials on a lateral raise versus a full range of motion, yes, you'll be able to lift more weight, but the external moment arm between the shoulder, or the axis of rotation, and the weight is much smaller. And so the actual amount of tension being produced by the shoulders in that exercise might end up being pretty similar. And so to make a long story short, tension is a complicated factor, and I don't think it's being assessed properly here.
But I think that we have to stop falling in love with research when it comes out and considering it to be the end-all be-all, because there's more to, let's say, a face pull that we're comparing it to that does not do a good job of having tension in that position. By the way, the load to use in a face pull is always going to be very low. 30 pounds, 60 pounds, whatever it is on your stack there. And when you have your arms out in front of you here, the tension through the muscles that you're ultimately going to work is at its lowest. It peaks when the arms are perpendicular to that cable. It's going to be lowest when they're parallel. So it does not meet the criteria for being a great long length partial exercise, but should we do it? That's the question.
I agree. Exercises should not be assessed purely on the lengthened position. However, it is one of the more evidence-based things we have. We have around 25 studies all in all comparing more shortened exercises to more lengthened exercises, more shortened contractions to more lengthened contractions and so forth. And consistently, more lengthened positions seem to be better for hypertrophy. And so it should absolutely be one of the main things to look at an exercise with. But there are other considerations. The reason other considerations can sometimes be less important as well is because many exercises tend to do reasonably well. Building muscle is not that complicated. You can do so with sets of 5 repetitions, 30 repetitions, or even 40 repetitions. So if, for example, you're new to pull-ups, right, and you can only get 5 to 8 reps, guess what? Because you can do at least 5 reps with that exercise, it isn't meaningfully worse on account of loadability than something you can do for 10 to 12 reps. Because there is such a wide effective rep range, you don't need to worry too much about loadability typically. That is, unless you're not strong enough to do 5 reps with an exercise, or too strong and you need to do more than 50 reps or so. And so most of the factors that regard hypertrophy exercise selection are pretty flexible. Hypertrophy is pretty flexible as an adaptation, whereas something like strength is much more specific. And so that's why I think considering the stretch as an important factor when it comes to exercise selection is absolutely justified. But let's keep watching.
Well, I think the bigger question we have to ask right away, though, is there something else that's happening here? Maybe it's less magical than you think. Because a lot of the use of long length partials, especially in the case of Sam Sulek, is that they're occurring at the end of sets after the person has already reached concentric muscle failure. And failure is a big concept here. Right. In other words, are you training with a higher intensity because you're now employing long length partials? So you go through all of your full range of motion repetitions and you're only using partials, not because you decided I'm going to use partials from the beginning of my set, but you're doing them out of necessity because you cannot move the weight any further because of the fatigue through any additional range of motion. There's a big difference there, and that requires that you've already failed concentrically, and you're forced to have to use these partials in the extended range. When we talk about the gains of 5 to 10%...
A few thoughts here. One, I don't entirely disagree here. We now have one study, and that's unpublished because I'm involved in it, I happen to have knowledge of it. We have a study where we compared just doing a full range of motion set on the calf raise to then extending the set with the other leg, doing lengthened partials after failure. And in that one study on this topic of doing lengthened partials after you had failure, we saw 50% more hypertrophy when doing those partials after failure. However, here he's referring to 5 to 10% more growth from partials versus a full range of motion. And importantly, what he's not mentioning is that that figure, and pretty much all of the studies besides this one study, have been done on lengthened partials as a standalone modality. In other words, they're comparing doing just partials as the whole set to just full range of motion as the whole set. And they find more hypertrophy generally with just partials. So it's important to keep in mind that that is where we have the most evidence on just doing partials, not on doing partials after failure like Sam Sulek is doing. And in general, I don't really care what Sam Sulek is doing. No shade, just me.
I think we need to make sure that we're also looking at that with the right frame of mind. Is 5 to 10% gains in muscle size, or really in any lab setting, is it a significant amount of increase? Yes, it is. Again, in a laboratory setting, that is. But when we look at the application of that in the real world, you may not be as excited about it as it might seem. Let's say we're going to measure strength, okay? A 10% increase in strength over the course of a study. Take a 250-pound bench press, that goes up to 275 by the time you're done. 10% increase.
Yeah, that's big.
It's pretty big, right? Especially if that was your max. That's pretty big. But now, when we measure muscle size or hypertrophy, we've got a couple ways we can do that, but let's do it by the circumference of the muscle you trained. You're training your biceps in the study. You're gaining what? How much in 12 weeks? Let's say it's 2 inches.
Real quick, circumference measurements of your arm, for example, are not an often used tool in hypertrophy research. We generally have better tools, so it might be a bit of a, not a straw man, but discrediting how hypertrophy research typically runs.
2 inches on your arms from 15 inches to 17 inches, or from 15 inches with additional 10% to 17.2 inches. That's it, 2.2 versus 2. And if you gained an inch on your arms, it's 1 inch versus 1.1 inch. And if you're giving up the alternative options and you're seeking out, like our questioner is, only exercises that can allow you to perform long length partials, are you missing a much bigger picture here? And that's where I want to go back to the face pull. Because this face pull is traditionally a corrective exercise. But I don't want you to look at it as just a corrective exercise. In other words, diminish its value versus a sexier heavy lat pull down. It can't possibly be a muscle builder. Yes, it can. Because this face pull, while a damn good muscle builder in its own right, believe it or not, again, you go back and look at some of your growth and development there, right? It has this other effect too. It amplifies your performance on the big lifts.
I'm not really going to touch on the face pull as a means to correct posture or prevent injuries and all that. Not my expertise. But I will say that attributing all of, what's his name? Jesse? I think it's Jesse. Attributing all of his back growth to just face pulls is a bit disingenuous. I'm pretty sure across his seemingly 5 to 10 years of training, Jesse has done way more than just face pulls. On top of that, Jesse might just have great genetics for back growth, or he might have done a lot of machine rows, or a lot of pull downs, or a lot of pullovers, or any other number of exercises. He might also have great sleep, low stress. In other words, there's so many other factors that play into his back growth that saying that his back has grown predominantly or primarily or even a lot as a result of face pulls, that's a very difficult inference of causality to make. And that's why we have studies, to control for many of these factors as well as we can possibly do to see whether our hypotheses are actually likely to be true. Without controlling for all this noise, you really can't make this assumption. Because I'm guessing Jesse has done dozens and dozens of different back exercises over his career. Why would it be the face pull? Why not something else? So yeah, just a point more broadly, I know a lot of people make this mistake. In my opinion, it is a mistake.
Filling in those weak links in the kinetic chain on the bigger compound exercises, you wind up getting a higher sum total output on the big compound exercise because you've addressed the weak link. So these are not just corrective exercises, they're stage setters for much bigger performances on your big lifts.
Yeah.
And again, all you gotta do is look at Jesse here. How much did you weigh when you did your 560-pound deadlift?
163 at best.
I mean, that's a massive deadlift for someone at his size. How does he do it? Is it something magical? No, he is a disciple here of Athlean-X, and he's been doing face pulls for a hell of a long time.
It's true.
And he's got definitely very well-developed upper back muscles. And he's got that from doing his face pulls, but I think beyond that, it led to a much bigger deadlift, which led to more muscle size. So ask yourself this question.
So I'm gonna give Jesse here the benefit of the doubt, and that was a true deadlift and not just fake plates, because I know Athlean-X has been accused of fake plates before. But imagine claiming that face pulls led to your deadlift progress. There are much bigger muscle groups involved in the deadlift that are responsible for essentially all of how strong you get in the deadlift. How good your technique is and how strong your hip extensors are, namely your glutes, hamstrings, adductors, is going to be by far a much bigger contributor to deadlift performance. And hell, because he's citing Jesse as an anecdote, I'm going to cite anecdotes too. Many high-level powerlifters don't do face pulls, and yet they deadlift way more than Jesse does. Does that mean face pulls make you weaker at the deadlift? No, I don't think so, but I'm just illustrating how using anecdotes to make an argument can really be pretty weak and silly sometimes. But the irony of Athlean-X here claiming that face pulls make your deadlift stronger is not lost on me, given the 405 fake plate deadlift controversy.
When you look at those studies that compare, let's say, even the same person doing a leg extension, one leg with partials and the other leg without, yes, you're comparing the partials versus someone who's not using partials, but are you comparing the partials to someone who maybe just focused on progressive overload and heavy squatting? Because the strength focus could have produced greater than 5 to 10% gains in muscle size.
It's true.
Right? There's more than one way to skin a cat. And I think when we start to fall in love with the research and we get excited about it, which we should, but we start to say, hey, everything else goes out the window, including your face pulls, Jeff, because I need something that does long length partials, you're diminishing the other benefits that you get.
Hey, he cited the Pedrosa study, so well done. I agree, we need more research looking at more ecologically valid contexts, right? The way people will actually train in practice. With that being said, many of these studies serve more as a proof of principle. And with us having quite a few of these studies now looking at the lengthened versus shortened position, generally finding better growth in the lengthened position, we seem to have evidence of a generalizable principle. Will we ever have evidence on every single movement in every single context? No. But we do have evidence that is contributing to the understanding of a generalizable scientific principle that we can use to determine how best to train for hypertrophy.
This face pull allows you to do much more than that. There's some downstream benefits that come from this that in the end of the day, maybe at the end of a year, you're far surpassing whatever 5 to 10% increase you were getting from long length partials. Again, I'm not saying long length partials don't work. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you have to make sure you compare it and broaden up your picture here. The other thing I would say is, are there other benefits to using full range of motion? And it's very clear there are. I actually made a whole video where some have shown.
Jeff, talk about full range of motion and its benefits one more time. I dare you. All jokes aside, there's definitely use cases for full range of motion. I'm not disputing that. But when it comes to maximizing hypertrophy, there is nowadays relatively compelling evidence that lengthened partials might be better for hypertrophy. That's my stance.
They have the same increased flexibility levels by just performing all of their weight exercises in the gym through a full range of motion. In other words, negating the need to stretch. Now, I don't fully advocate that because I think some people develop tightnesses that need specific stretching, but just as an overall concept, there have been studies that show that. So you can't just say, hey, long length partials and focus so far in on just hypertrophy when the bigger picture, meaning your overall athleticism. I mean, for me, it's impossible to really separate all these things, but your overall athleticism, your strength. And maybe you aren't really so focused on your strength, but I can tell you right now, you better damn well should be, because as you get older, it's one of the biggest predictors of your function throughout the rest of your life and your mortality risk. The stronger you are, the better you're going to be, and the healthier you're going to maintain.
Two things you mentioned. One is your overall strength and athleticism. Performance outcomes like strength and athleticism overall are range of motion specific. So if your sport involves a full range of motion, you should probably be training mostly through a full range of motion. If your sport doesn't, and most sports don't, you should be training mostly through a partial range of motion in the gym. Second, when it comes to longevity from lifting weights, it is true that both muscle mass and strength levels are predictors of healthful aging. However, that doesn't mean you should be able to deadlift 500 pounds, 600 pounds, 700 pounds to be in your best health. In fact, the best health associations between strength and healthful aging are generally seen with relatively low strength levels. Like if you deadlift 315, there's a good chance you're already maximizing your long-term health. You don't need to be an elite strength athlete to get those health benefits.
How about explosiveness? Is that of any value to you? So why are we only looking at one element? Why is it always about just hypertrophy? I mean, I love a good pump, I love a good muscle gain, but it's really about more than that.
Listen, Jeff, you know exactly why it's all about hypertrophy. Because no one cares how flexible you are. No one cares about you lift. How big is your bicep? You feel me? That's all I care about.
Trying to evaluate exercises solely based on this one aspect is going to definitely leave major holes in your training and something you're likely not going to be happy with. And when you realize that in the case of your 5 to 10% increase, your 2-inch increase in the size of your arms versus the potential 2.2-inch increase in the size of your arms, it's just a wake-up call to how myopic it might be to be looking at your training through that one single lens. So to answer our friend's question here, what exercise should you do instead? You shouldn't. You should still do the face pull. You should still do partial repetitions. You should still do eccentric overload. You should still focus on strength. You should still maximize your flexibility. You need to do it all. And I'm sorry if you're looking for a shortcut around that answer, but all of these things are important and all play a major part.
I agree. Most people have a variety of goals. With that being said, I think Jeff is falling into this classic pitfall of just recommending that you do everything, include everything. Oh, short length partials? Yes. Full range of motion? Yes. Length of partials? Yes. Eccentric overload? Yep. Isometric holds? Yep. Do it all. Just do it all. When in reality, certain strategies are just better than others. You don't need to include everything, especially if your main or only aim is hypertrophy. Why would you include things that are worse if you can just do more of what's better? So just evaluate your goals and include what makes sense based on your goals. It's called a needs analysis. And that's how a lot of strength and conditioning coaches actually operate, is to look at what you need as a person and what your goals are, and then base your training recommendations off of that. Not just say, hey, include everything, bro. Because that basically boils down to training ADHD.
In terms of the studies, guys, it's the responsibility of those that share the information with you, not just to have it go in one side of the brain and out the other and just regurgitate, but to actually apply some science to it. And that is something I think is sorely lacking, let's just say, in YouTube fitness as a whole. Make sure that you understand what you can do with this information so you can make it better and take it a step further.
Nice. I'm glad that Athlean-X ended it on that note, because hey, we be out here citing research, even conducting research. We be sciencing. And I also appreciate that he cited some papers throughout the study. That was really a welcome addition. Because I know back in the day, his videos used to be worse than what I just saw. So I think Athlean-X is kind of 50-50 about lengthened partials. I think he gets some stuff right, but he doesn't get everything right. Overall, as far as the advice given in this video and the interpretation of scientific findings, I would give it like a 5 out of 10. It's good that he cited research and he understood some of it pretty well, but there is room for improvement. And hey, no personal beef with Athlean-X whatsoever. It is all meant in good humor. that is the video. If there's anyone else you'd like to see me react to from an exercise scientist perspective, leave a comment down below and I'll get to it. Like the video, comment, subscribe. I know like half of you aren't already, so please do subscribe, hit the bell as well. Are you looking for a training app that will do everything a good coach does for you, but at a fraction of the price of a good coach? And do you want to have a training program that is truly individualized and cutting edge as far as the science goes? Building you an individualized and optimal program for hypertrophy. If the answer to any of that is yes or no, I don't take no for an answer here, check out MyoAdapt.com. MyoAdapt is an app we've been working on for several years now with a team of sports scientists behind it, aiming to use the latest scientific research in combination with our own coaching experience to create an app that is like a high-level scientific coach in your pocket. Just like a good coach, it'll ask you questions about your lifestyle, how much time you have to train, how often you want to train, what sort of routine you want to run, if there's any muscles you want to bring up, and it will create a program individualized to you. And better yet, it improves week upon week based on your feedback. Go to myoadapt.com, sign up to be notified when it comes out, and if you do sign up when it comes out in the next few months, you'll be able to lock in at a price that is as low as it's ever going to get. If you'd like me to coach you, in the meantime, check out the link above and I could become your coach. And now that I've sold out, let me end the video and tell you all to have a phenomenal day. Peace out.